Okay, so I will get the slides up now. There we go. Okay, so this is something that was devised about a year ago now, I think, by myself and some of the people that were quite active at the time. And it was supposed to be the start of a bit of an introduction into Fleet Command, um, and some of the concepts that you might want to put together in order to lead your own fleets. So I did say in the pings and things that I was going to record this, upload it to YouTube. Various reasons for that. One is that we often get asked to repeat classes in different time zones, and there are some time zones I'm not going to be able to do this class in anytime soon. So I thought best if I record it, and then that way I can upload it to YouTube and people can watch it back. So as far as I can work out, none of you will actually end up on the recording because I can't get that to work. But just in case, just be aware of that in case suddenly it starts working. Um, this is a semi-interactive class. There's likely going to be some discussions, so that's going to be of limited value now to anyone listening to this, but some value hopefully nonetheless. Okay, so let's just make a start anyway. So we're going to look at the concept of fleet command, but maybe around focusing on what we call threat analysis or sort of appraising the situation that's in front of you. Okay. Now, before we start, we should just get out the way a few things. One is that some of the terminology and concepts won't be familiar to people who are very new at the game. Some will, some won't. It depends where you are on your journey. The idea was that we would just show this anyway, and that we would say, it's well supplemented with the core classes that Eve Uni runs, as well as all the other things that you can find about this wonderful game. We're going to cover briefly what a fleet is and how it's made up. That might sound very basic, but you'll see that it's a little bit more advanced than your very beginner level. Then we're going to go into some analysis of the different ship types and also weapon types, different types of ways of applying damage or mitigating damage. And then we're going to look at some other tools and techniques to do with this topic. Some of those are in the game, some of those are out of the game. Some are very advanced, some are not so much. So anyway, let's make progress. So the first thing we're going to think about is what is our fleet and what is its strengths and capabilities. And if you can understand the capabilities and strengths of your own fleet, well, what about your prospective opponent? Okay, so how would you assess their abilities, strengths, capabilities? Then you need to have a little think perhaps about how those two things interact. So what we find in this game is we're talking mostly right here about PvP fleets. So we're trying to find people to shoot or people are trying to shoot us. This game is a lot about what we call game theory. Okay, so in game theory, you make a move on your opponent when you think you're in a winning position. Um, you decide whether to make a move based on the chance of you being successful. And there's lots of mind games we play when we're playing games with each other that influence the tactics that we employ. Sometimes we try to pretend that we're weaker than we are, but we're always just trying to play the game when our opponent is a little bit weaker than us. Because if we're too strong, they won't play with us, and if we're too weak, we lose. So we need to have an understanding of how our fleet strengths and capabilities interact with our opponents, but also what they think our strengths and capabilities are, and that just goes on and on. Okay. So what is a fleet? Well, a fleet is a group of, in this game at least, a group of players that are in different ships. Yeah, in terms of a PvP fleet, we talk about the following components. Okay. So you may have watched some of the tournaments that go on, the PvP tournaments in Eve, and you may have seen or you may notice if you watch the Alliance tournament this weekend or any of the replays from last weekend, that there are 3 bars of sort of statistic that go above each team composition. Okay, and one of those is the DPS, the ability to deal damage. The next one then is the ability to tank the damage. So that's the ability for a fleet to survive incoming damage in different ways. So that's your sort of repairs and your hull and your shields and your armor and things like that. And then the third thing is the control element. So how many tools and different modules have you got with you to be able to control your opposition, and also control whether they can run away or not in many cases. And then we usually have some way of perceiving the world around us, right? In EVE University, that's scouts. We tend to use a player that is going to go ahead of us and get some intel. But in other cases, in larger sort of fleets and in bigger groups, people might have cloaky eyes around the place, or they might have spies and things like that. So there's various ways that people might perceive the world around them without the use of scouts necessarily. Now, you may think about your own ship. If you fit a ship up for any sort of PvP engagement, it may have a component of being able to deal damage. It may have some tank. It should have at least some tank, whether that be using speed to avoid damage or just take it in the face with resistance. And sometimes some sort of control, like a warp scrambler or a warp disruptor or a dampener or something. Well, your ship can be fit that way. A fleet is essentially, more of that. It's a scaled up PvP ship. So here we go. We have here some components that demonstrate this. So we have, beams for damage at the top. Then we have an afterburner, which is going to allow us to travel while maintaining a low signature radius. So that can help us mitigate us against some damage. This webifier will control how far away people are from us, and so will this scram, and we can use it to either defensively control the distance our opponent can get to us at, or perhaps to pin them down close to us. And then we have some local tank, so an armor repairer, and some damage control for resistance, and some other modules that sort of affect stats, among the rest of the things. So, dealing damage. Okay, so when we look at like the concept of threat analysis, you may see some big scary ships in front of you, or they may seem big and scary, but what is it about the composition of the fleet you're up against, the group you're up against, that is scary or not? And essentially what we're dealing with here is a relationship between our ship and our fleet and the opposition's damage type and vice versa. Okay, so in brief, lots of weapons in EVE go to some extreme of some sort. Okay, so weapons can have lots of damage per second, but maybe poor application of that damage. That might be because they need to be really up close, or they might struggle to track things. Sometimes, though, they have lower DPS but apply damage to everything. And this is the case in small missiles. If you're in range of a small missile, damage will apply rather consistently. Up here, we have that tracking has a part to play, and sometimes the opponent or your capacitor is required in order to deal damage. And there are certain modules that help you increase the amount of damage that you give out, or that get damage you're taking, such as tracking computers, target painters. All of these things will alter the amount of damage being applied. If you understand the basic types of weapons and sizes of weapons, you start to gain a lot more knowledge then about the dangers faced in front of you, because when you start to understand things like a good starting point would be the rapid light missile, something that applies to small ships because it's a small weapon type. It also applies to medium ships, and of course, it also applies to large ships. It just doesn't do as much damage as large weapons does. You'll realize then that weapon type has got a good amount of strengths to it, and one of those strengths is the ability to apply lots of damage really quickly to small ships like frigates. That is what we might call what's the term for it? Anti-tackle. Tackle ships are small frigates in most cases, and rapid lights can kill them quickly. Okay, so that's a common sort of bit of information you might want to appreciate. And then another on the other end of the scale, we have things like artillery weapons. Well, artillery weapons deal a lot of what we call alpha strike damage. So they do lots of damage all in one go, but then they take a while to reload and do that again. Another weakness, a weakness, sorry, of projectile weapons that are artillery is that they are very slow at tracking. So if you imagine tracking as pointing at something really far away from you, if that thing is moving rather quickly, even if it's really far away, you can follow it with your finger outstretched quite easily. But if that thing was traveling really fast but up close to you, your finger, would need to move a lot quicker in order to keep up with it. And artillery weapons, that finger's moving rather slowly. So on the one hand, artillery weapons have a weakness in that people can avoid them rather easily. But if you're really far away from an artillery weapon, even if it's a really large one and ordinarily wouldn't apply very well to small things, suddenly if we can get a good sort of the correct maths around targeting you and tracking you, you could just be obliterated from the field. So understanding things like okay, this artillery, it won't apply well to my small ships unless I'm really far away, in which case, it will. But those are the sorts of things that help you to understand as an FC the threat that's in front of you. And then we have other things which we'll come on to. Okay, so in general, and if I just bring up the game itself for a moment, these are the weapon. These are the ship types. If we look at the Amarr ship tree, we have small weapons down here. So it's not all of these things fire a weapon, but we have small things here. So any of these frigates are considered small. Destroyers are also fit with small weapons. Those small weapons apply to everything, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, as long as you're in range and as long as the thing you're shooting at is, there and you've locked it and all those different things, and you're not being impeded by, tracking disruption or different things like that, you've got a good chance of hitting it. With cruiser sized hulls, you're looking at medium sized weapons. Each different type of weapon will have a medium variant. With medium weapons, okay, they can apply to small things, just not brilliantly. Medium weapons will apply fine to medium-sized ships, and they'll also apply fine to larger ships as well, and they do a bit more damage. Then we move on to the middle ground here. We have some special ones here, which can actually fit either medium weapons. Some of them, though, fit large weapons, like this Oracle. Because it's an attack battle cruiser, it can fit large weapon types in a medium-sized hull. This is where, if you're using large weapons, you start to lose that application now against everything smaller than cruisers and smaller, really. I mean, large weapons can apply to cruisers, fine, I suppose, but anything smaller than that, you really are struggling to apply. But cruisers could. This is where you could start to get away from the damage of a large weapon as well. And then we have the extra large stuff, which is not something I'm going to cover today. Okay, so back to the slides. Okay, so next topic, just briefly, tanking. With tanking, this is where we're trying to sort of talk about how you might avoid damage, okay, or deal with damage. Small signature radii is a very good way of generally making it difficult for things to hit you. And combine that with high speed and agility, and small ships can try to run away, essentially, from damage from medium and large weapons, and some small as well. Other fleet types will tank with Logi ships. So you'll see repair being put onto ships with what we call a buffer tank. So those situations, the ships that you're flying for DPS will be fit with some extra HP in the armor, for example, and then you'll bring along armor repairers, ships that will repair that armor, and stop those ships from dying. And then other times, people might tank with overwhelming damage, so using attack as a form of defense. Well, this is where you have things like those destroyers I was talking about, with their very small weapons, but lots of them, perhaps using an overwhelming number of those small things to shoot at something and kill it before it can kill you. In some fleet engagements, you'll have no Logi on the other side, but if they can kill your DPS ships quicker than you can kill theirs, they'll win by a war of attrition. And then lastly, we have the character skills themselves affecting tank ability. At the end of the day, when we have fleets mixed pilots from a week old up to 10 months, up to 2 years, we have lots of different statistics then around how much tank, how much speed, how much agility, how much resistance, and all of these different things that people have. So unless everybody's got a predictable amount of these stats, you kind of need to adjust for that as well. I'm going to stop here a second and say, are there any questions before I move on? Nope, no problem. Right. So then the last little topic, control. So we've dealt with damage, we've dealt with tank just briefly. With control, now we're looking at how you or your enemy might affect some of these factors we've discussed, and also perhaps prevent you from leaving or prevent you from traveling as fast, things like that. So the most typical control modules and different things you'll see are the tackle modules. They're not called tackle in the game. This is just a term that is used. What we mean really is things like warp disruptors, which sometimes is known as a point, a warp scrambler, known as a scram often, or perhaps things like interdiction bubbles, known as bubbles. They can be static, they can be on ships, and they can be deployed by ships. Those are the things that stop you warping away. So that's one form of control. The next would be different types of E-War. Now, in the game, you'll see a whole raft of things listed as E-War, but when people talk about E-War, what they typically mean are things like sensor dampeners, which affect how quickly things can lock or how far ships can lock. Then you have things like tracking disruptors, missile disruptors that affect missiles or turret-based weapons. But then you've also got things like jams, ECM jams, which will essentially stop your opponent from locking anything except the ship that's jamming them. So if a Griffin gets on field and jams the opponent's Logi, that Logi can only now lock the Griffins that are jamming them, which is obviously quite effective. Then we have things like capacitor warfare. So there are ships out there that will specifically target your capacitor, and it's often said, no capacitor, no life. Well, you need capacitor to move very, more quickly than your base speed, because you need to activate your micro warp drive or afterburner. You often need your capacitor to activate your local tank modules, things like armor repairers or resistance hardeners and things. You need capacitor sometimes to fire your weapons. So laser weapons, turret-based laser weapons rely on capacitor, as do hybrid weapons. And things like warp scramblers. If you've got your enemy tackled down with a warp scram and they affect your capacitor, you might not be able to run that scram anymore, and then they can get away and control you. Lastly, just going to touch on what we call links. So in the game, they're known as command bursts. These are buffs essentially to some aspects of your control or your tank, or your agility, but that's part of tank. There are things that can also help you with lock range and things. There are also mining links, which affect mining attributes. So with these, you can increase the resistance of your shield or armor by a significant amount. You can increase your speed and agility. You can increase the range of your tackle modules like webifiers and scrams and things like this. Those things can be quite powerful. And if you see the opponent has command destroyers or command ships, which are T2 battle cruisers, they're often using links. And if your opponent has links and you don't, then that's something, again, you could factor in. So when you meet in New Eden, you're in your fleet and you come across other players, players that might want to shoot you, players you might want to shoot. What do we have? So we have our scout. Not all scouts will tackle, so sometimes the interdictor is the tackler. In some larger fleets, they might have more than one. So if you're out there and you see a stiletto, you don't know yet if that stiletto is part of somebody just traveling and moving their stuff, or is it part of a 250 person strategic operation from a nullsec power block. You don't know. It could be one of many scouts. It could be just one. It could just be somebody moving high value assets that are small around where they live. Then we have other sorts of ways of perceiving. So, okay, so you see your scout out there, you look them up, and you see that they're part of a big, large null block. You may also see then that they've just been on a kill mail from 10 minutes ago, and you look up the Z kill and you see that they're actually on a kill mail for some ships, and there were 100 people on that kill mail. So that scout was one of 100. Suddenly you've got a lot more information. So when you're out there, remember that the opponents are probably doing this to you too. And then you've got your political and social knowledge. So as you play the game, you will develop an understanding of typical behavior of a scout, what kind of techniques they use to either entice you or try and run away. And generally, you might get to know some people's names as well, and different alliances and things, and that can often tell you a lot. So, as an example, if you see, a Pandemic Horde stiletto in Pandemic Horde space, and you're roaming their space, there's a good chance that they're looking for you, and they're going to try and bring something to kill you. It depends on where you are exactly, but that's a relatively safe or fair assumption. On the other hand, then you might see a stiletto in the middle of nowhere from a group, I don't know, say Tuskers or something. Well, Tuskers are a well-known sort of small gangy type group. They live in wormholes, so immediately, I would be thinking, oh, is there a wormhole nearby? I wonder who else is online. I wonder if they're going to be roaming around. So you just gain that sort of knowledge over time, really. And then the in-game map, as well as Dotlan and other sort of tools, will also give you rich information about how many jumps that have been in that system or the systems near you, how many kills, the ship kills, NPC kills, capsule kills. All these different things are available as statistics on the in-game map and also on tools such as Dotlan. And there's another one called SMT that I'll show you briefly, actually. So this is a nice, neat little program that people use to alert them of the presence of neutrals around their space and things. It's just loading up now. And this program will give you sort of information that Dotlan or the in-game map will, just in an external program that can set up with different sort of statistics. So if I just bring that program along. So when I'm roaming around an FC, and I'll often use this program, and I can attach it to my characters, and if I just pick a character that's definitely logged in, it'll suddenly show that that character is currently in PC9AY. And I've got an alt logged off in the adjacent system. That's a bit of intel for you. And any other sort of characters that I've got will also show. And if I was in a fleet right now, and I was the fleet boss, I would be able to see all my fleet members and where they are on this map. So I could see the scouts and where they are ahead of us. I could see any stragglers, things like that. Now, these buttons down here, they will change different parameters. Now, we're in a quiet bit of space, but you'll see that some of these things will light up when I choose them. This is jumps. You can tell because that's the low sec entry. That's jumps in the last 24 hours. And then things like timers, well, here we are. There's all sorts of little sort of things, NPC kills and things like that. So what have we got here? NPC kills in the last hour. I can hover over these. It'll show me some stats like NPC kill delta. So there've been 97 kills, no delta. So it's not changing a lot. 26 jumps, things like this. Thera connections are also on here. Lots of people use these sorts of tools, and they're very, very useful. Now, are they safe in terms of, is your data being collected and stuff? I have no idea, but so use your own judgment and do your own research. But I personally don't do anything that I'm not really that bothered. But you might have some very precious assets that you don't want anyone to have any information about. Any questions before I move on? Nope. Okay, right. Next, okay, so different ship types. I've already mentioned this in the when I showed you the ship tree. Okay, so I won't go too much further with this. Just making sure the recording's working properly. Yeah. When you get on grid, you may see these symbols, or you will see the symbols somewhere. They're good to know, especially when you first start. If you don't know them, get to know them. Small ships will be a small triangle. Destroyers will have a line underneath that triangle. Cruisers are a bit bigger. Battle cruisers, next level up. Cruiser with a line underneath. Battleships are pointy. Dreadnoughts have a pointy bottom on them. Carriers look funny. Super carriers are like super carriers. And Titans, well, if you don't know what a Titan is, they're the ships that are the most expensive and able to send fleets of stuff across galaxy to do different things. So these are your PvP capable ships, really, in this top bit. And then industrial ships will have a rounded top to them. So you can generally see the difference between, a combat capable ship and what is supposed to be a bonus industrial ship with a rounded edge. But don't be fooled, because some of these mining barges are actually quite dangerous. Like the Bakura has a drone damage bonus, which is quite nasty. And some of these industrial command ships have capabilities that make PvP with them quite challenging. Like the Rorquals, like it's got an invincibility button of sorts. What do they call it? Panic. Panic is called. So yeah, try and tackle a Rorqual with 5 people, and you'll find that it just won't die. So I've already said this, so I'll just repeat what's on the slides. Okay, small weapons apply well to small ships. Any other weapon will struggle to apply to fast, low signature radius frigates. So if it's not a small weapon type, you need to control that frigate in order to apply to it and damage it. Which is why a lot of people will go, towards the smaller ships when they get really good at the game, because they can avoid lots of different types of damage. It's ironic, really, that we put our very newest players in these very, very powerful and difficult to control frigates. And when they die, they're not really 100% sure why they died. It's a good thing in a sense, because, it's a good opportunity to learn. It doesn't cost a lot. But if only they weren't seen so much as new player ships, because they're very powerful. And there are lots of them that are very, very expensive and difficult to handle in the right way, but powerful, like I say. Then we have, like I said, the counter plays. You need to control that frigate in order to apply to it if you're in anything other than a small weapon type ship. For example, the destroyer is deadly to frigates because it has those small weapons and lots of them. But the destroyer itself is slower and larger. Therefore, it's more vulnerable to larger ships, but also it's sort of something you might be able to run away from as a frigate, for example. Next, I've already said that we did medium guns, so I'll just go for the highlights here. Medium-sized weapons, they apply well to everything in the game, but not all the time. There are some medium weapons that don't apply well to frigates, or you need a lot more control to do so, because, when it comes to things like the beam weapons or the artillery weapons that track more slowly, well, a cruiser-sized, medium-sized artillery is going to track much slower than a small one. It's generally a choice between good damage application or just overall better numbers. Those numbers you see in the DPS, sort of in the fitting tool, that's just a theoretical number. It's affected by quality of hit. It's affected by application of that damage. It's affected by range. There's so many things, and sometimes bigger number isn't always better, because application is often king. Cruisers themselves are vulnerable to a wide range of weapon types, because larger weapons can apply to cruisers, as can small. So cruisers can be killed by anything, but equally cruisers can potentially kill anything as well. So they are a middle ground, but not necessarily a jack of all trades. The combat battle cruisers are a medium-sized hull, and I've already mentioned some of the other stuff. There's the option of the Lynx, as I was saying earlier, but I didn't mention the micro jump drive that you can fit to the battle cruiser hulls, which includes then the large battleships too. The attack battle cruisers, and there's one for each race, can have the large weapon type, but they are much, much less tanky than a battleship. Battleships then, biggest DPS numbers in the subcap category, obviously. More range than any other two, more health points, hit points, and they can fit the micro jump drive. Well, where's the drawbacks? We've already mentioned application to smaller stuff, but also slower lock speeds. The smaller the thing you're trying to lock as a battleship, the longer it's going to take to lock. The difficulty applying DPS is ever present, but something you can, if you know what you're doing, deal with. They tend to have either fit for the active tanks, so things like local repairers, armor repairers, shield boosters, or they have the very high buffer tank, so they have lots of health points so that they can last a long time, or so they can be repaired. We also have the Marauder, which is the Tech 2 battleship that's mainly for PvE, but is used a lot for PvP as well. Generally considered to be one of the most powerful ships in the game. Definitely considered often the most powerful subcapital ship. They can fight stationary, so there's a Bastion module they can employ to increase their damage and range and tank. They can survive a long time against smaller ships. Marauders resist some types of E-War. These are things that have been tweaked recently, and it is now more possible to apply E-War, so control elements, to Marauders. And the single Marauder is no longer the most scary thing that a group can undock against you if you're in a small group of ships looking for PvP, because you can now take counters along with you, like the sensor damps or the tracking disruptors, or the missile disruptors, and you can survive against them. And it's more a challenge then of trying to break the tank they have, which is quite extensive and significant. The other Tech 2 battleship is the Blops battleship, things like the Redeemer. They can bridge, which means send some frigates, essentially, usually to a Black Ops Sino, or they can conduit jump, where they take those ships next to them and themselves to that Sino. Blops battleships can also light a hard Sino, which is something that is unique. There's not many ships that can light a hard Sino. A hard Sino is when any type of stuff could come through the other end of it. So if you're in a big group space like Fraternity or Pandemic Horde or Goon Swarm, and they light a Sino, and it's what we know as a hard Sino, a normal Sino, well, they can bridge a fleet onto you through a Titan, so anything can come through. So one of the sort of things you learn as an FC is the types of ships that can do this, because when you're even in low sec, and perhaps in range of Snuffed Out and Shadow Cartel and groups like that, there's a chance that your 15-person fleet could suddenly have a Sino lit by the types of ships that can, and you could be suddenly surrounded by all sorts of stuff that just pops up on your overview. Normal PvP ships. Right, before I move on to faction stuff, any questions? Oh, okay, moving on. Right, faction T2 and T3. So there are your T1 ships, and we've become quite familiar with those in EVE Uni. We use a lot of them. The Caracal, for example, we use the destroyers, like the different types of destroyer, almost all of them. We use a lot of the frigates in our flight tech. They're all T1 in the main. So what is the difference then? What is a faction ship and T2 ship and things like this? So I'm going to flit between this slide and the game again. To begin with, let's look at faction ships. So they have more offensive and defensive power. Okay, if I go back to the game, when we look at, say, the Amarr faction, we could look at the Destroyer. We could look at the Coercer. It has a 10% bonus to small NG tracking speed and 10% to small NG turret activation cost. And then we have a roll bonus, 50% bonus to small NG turret optimal range. We have 3 bonuses there, one for range, one for tracking, and one for activation cost. If we move up to the Navy version, we now have more bonuses, as you can see. And one of those bonuses is for the damage. So that's the kind of nature of these sorts of things. You will tend to see that the Navy ships will either have better defense resistances or they'll have better damage. It's not always the case, but that's the kind of thing you see. Okay, so the next slide deals with the next bit of the slide deals with T2 ships. Okay, so what's the difference between a T1 ship and a T2 ship? So it's good to know when you're out there and you're starting to identify the different ships, what sort of things you'll see. So let's have a look at some common ones. Okay, so let's look at the frigate this time. Let's look at the, will be a T1 tackle frigate for the Amarr. The Punisher, that's a reasonable one. So a lot of these ships could be used as a tackle ship. Maybe I should cheat and just go to Minmatar and show you the what is it called? The T1 tackle ship. The Slasher. Okay, so we have the Slasher here. What's a Slasher? It's a decent tackle ship. It's got the 80% reduction in propulsion jamming activation cost. You could click on this and look up what is propulsion jamming, and it's required for these things, webs, scrams. So it's a good way of, sort of getting to know things, just to click these things. You can find out what is a small weapon, what are these things. So what's the difference then between a Slasher and the T2 variant, you could argue, is the Stiletto or the Claw? Well, first of all, the bonuses will be more specific and specialized. So in a T2 ship, you're going to get specific things that it's going to be really good at. The Slasher is good at various things, okay? It's got a bonus to some weapon, so projectile damage, tracking speed, and it can tackle something as well. Well, the Stiletto is arguably better at tackling, but it doesn't have, is the damage the same, actually, the bonus? No, it does have the projectile damage. In this case, not a great example here, but the point stands, right? Generally, your T2 ship is going to be more specialized. It's going to be really good at a specific thing or things. Your T1 ships, they're going to be better at being all around. So when you see an interceptor like a Stiletto, you kind of know what it's doing, right? Generally, 99 times out of 100, you know what it's up to. Whereas with the T1 stuff, it's not as easy to work out exactly how it's fit or what it's doing. The other major difference is the tank. So what we see is with the T1 ships, they've often got some weakness in how they're tanked. So I don't know the easiest way to bring this up. Here it is. So there we are. There's 0% resistance to EM damage on the Slasher, okay, and 20% to thermal. Those numbers are low, right? So if you hit one of these things with EM or thermal damage, and it's not dealt with that through his fit, then that's a massive gaping hole in his tank, and that 350 hit points is going to be down to 0 very quickly there, and you're going to be into armor. Well, with the T2 variant, you're going to have slightly better stats for tank and across the board. So these are to do with different law reasons, but I won't go into those. It's just worth knowing that your T2 ship is going to have better resistances, whereas your T1 stuff has got more weaknesses in its tank. So back to the slides. So T3 ships. Now there's only 2, the Destroyer and the Cruiser. Their main benefit is their versatility. So one of the problems when you're faced with a T3 Destroyer or a T3 Cruiser is you're not 100% sure what it's fit like. They have different roles. They can be very versatile and fit for different things. I won't go into the detail because we'd be here for a long time. But you can look at their bonuses and you can start to understand. If you see a Loki in a large fleet, it's probably either webbing things or repairing things. There are other examples I could list, but I'll just stop there because there are too many permutations. And then we have the list of these Force Recon type ships that can light the hard Sino. So not just the Black Ops battleship, but also the Pilgrim, Rapier, Falcon, and Arazu. And then we have the combat recon ships. They're worth mentioning because they're another special sort of type of ship class that's quite dangerous in a PvP scenario. You've got the Curse, the Hugin, the Chisis, and Rook. So Amarr, Minmatar, Gallente, and Caldari. Each of these will be bonused for the thing that Minmatar and Amarr and Gallente are bonused for around EWAR. So if you know your EWAR, you'll know that the Curse is going to be good at NG neutralization and tracking disruption and missile disruption. That the Hugin is going to be really good at stasis webification. The Lachesis is going to be, and maybe target painting, right, in terms of Minmatar. Lachesis is going to be good with sensor dampeners and warp disruptors and warp scramblers. And the Rook is jams. And if there's more that Caldari does in terms of EWAR, I apologize to Caldari, but that's what I think about. The other thing about these combat recons is they're not detectable by D-scan. The bonuses for these things are significant. For the Unifleet, hard Sino is usually bad news. Kill the Sino maybe, but whatever's coming through, good luck with that. So a little note on ship recognition. Lots to learn, don't worry. This is it's perfectly normal to learn each ship one at a time. Nobody's expecting you to go out there and study them all. If you spend any amount of time in PvP, you'll see the same ships crop up over and over and over again. You'll know relatively quickly what a Malediction does, what a Stiletto does. You'll get to know pretty quickly what a Hugin does. And you'll get to know what the Logi ships are, things like this. Every time you come across a ship that you don't recognize, my advice, look it up. Look up what race is it? What type of ship? Is it a T1 or a T2? What role does it fill? And then eventually, what bonuses does it have? One day, you might then start to think about the weapon types and the different resistance holes, but one step at a time. I would start with, what size is this ship? Because if you can just start by categorizing ships by size, it's a great start. You know, there are special things to learn about each thing, but at the end of the day, if you can see the name and look at the symbol and know that's a frigate, or that's a destroyer, or that's a battleship, you're already much further along. If you also know what frigates kind of do and what battleships kind of do and what the strengths and weaknesses of them are. Feel free to play with things like Python and look up different types of PvP videos on YouTube. See how these concepts are applied in practice. There's lots to learn. The wiki, the EVUni wiki for ships is really good because it's something I probably use every day. I often find myself looking things up because there's so much to learn. There's so much depth to the game that even if you know roughly what Hugin does, there's going to be a day where you're thinking, oh, God, I need to remember something specific about it. And then you end up looking it up. Okay, so other tools. Let's have a look at time. So we're already quite far way into this. Websites and apps. So dscan.info is probably the fastest dscan tool. So what you can do is you can take your local list. So you could copy and paste the names of people in local, pop that in there. You could take, copy and paste your dscan. You can pop that in there, and you can then, with either one, search, and it'll give you a link. And well, it'll show you something on a page. You can take the link. That summary then can be shared via that link to other players. So you could be in a fleet, you could be the scout, or you could be somebody else. You could take a list like that, copy and paste into dscant.info, share that link with Discord, with your fleet members, and share a lot of info. Things like, what do we have here? 19 people in local. There's 11 without an alliance. 4 of them were Ivy League players. We had 2 toilet paper. Well, this was a long time ago, wasn't it? And 1 the Russia, 1 CVA. And then we have a summary of the corps. What do we have in space on the D-scan? This was in Stackmon once upon a time. 2 retrievers of 2 benches. So these are all mining ships, right? We've got them broken down here as ship classes. And then if I knew there was a Hugin, but it wasn't on D because they don't show up on D, I could add it manually. And then some other stuff. So this is a great thing to share with your FC or as FC to see and understand what you're facing. Because you've got things broken down into ship type, the ship name, and also perhaps the alliances and how they might be related. Let's see, some tools monitor the contents. Yeah, so these things, you can get some tools where if you copy something, it'll automatically search these things up for you. I can't vouch for these tools. I have used them in the past. Get in touch with me privately if you want a list of some of the names of the old tools. I don't vouch for them, but lots of people use them. Zkill, the classic kill board. We have the kill board itself, zkill.com. There's other types of things used for battle reports and stuff. This is the classic one run by a player of the game who survives off the many donations they receive. You can use this for intel purposes. You can find out what is this player all about, what do they do. You can't always rely on the information because people like this, Frederick or Von Hole, he will spin up a new character just to mess with you, create a silly looking kill board for it, and then tackle you in your Alliance tournament ship one day when you have enough money to buy one or win one. Yeah, so this person would track these ships. So these are very expensive ships. So this is a Virtuoso, an Alliance tournament prize ship once, called a Zkill with 151 billion. There's some others, the Tiamat, 235 billion. You can guarantee that Frederick Von Hole used Zkill to track this pilot and hatched a plan one day with friends to trap them and catch them and bait them and kill them. That's what he does. Next page, weapon recognition. I don't know if you've been on a fleet yet where somebody will announce the weapon type of the opponent. You can zoom in on ship, so you could look at the ship in space, and I think I'll show you that very quickly in the game. So let's have a look. If I just quickly get in a ship that has some weapons, yeah, this will do. So this is an Osprey Navy issue. One of the naming conventions, I didn't mention earlier, for Navy ships, faction ships, is if it was a Logi ship, which the Osprey is, and it has Navy issue attached onto it at the end. Well, what's happened is they've taken the humble Logi ship, turned it into a DPS dealing PvP ship. So trying to get a good angle here, but these are the weapons on the Osprey issue. We're going to try and identify them, okay? So there's various ways of doing it. There's the weapon there, okay? That's the weapon. How are we going to identify that? Let me just shrink down some of these things. How are we going to identify that? Well, first of all, some knowledge, right? So we can narrow it down to what does an Osprey Navy issue fit? Well, first of all, easy way, right? Show info. What could it be? Traits. Osprey Navy issue is bonused for light missile, and heavy assault missile, velocity, damage, etc. Okay, so chances are this ship is fit with one of those 3. Might not be, but it probably is. So if I could take a guess, how would I know? Well, first of all, I can tell you how I know what it is without take away the fact that I fit the ship. The first thing is that the size of the weapon tells me which type it is, because some of these things look the same. But the way I learned these things was I would just take the missile type, whatever the weapon type from the bonus, and I would just click on it, and then pick like the T2 variant, because most people will use the T2 variant. So if you go to 5, you'll see the T2 variant somewhere of that weapon type, right? Let's see, I'll find it eventually, because I'm currently looking at the actual missiles, not the weapon, right? So let's see, I'll do this from scratch. I'm trying to do 2 things at once, talk to you and do it. So these are the missiles. I want the thing that fires them, right? This thing. If I look at the T2 variant, heavy assault missile T2, I can click on that and I can see what it looks like. So that's what they should look like. If it was heavy assault missiles fit to this, that's what they would look like. So does that look like that? No. Yeah, get the idea. So I'll cheat, because otherwise it'd be all day. These are rapid light missiles. So if we went to the light missile, a bit of knowledge would tell us these are rapid lights. Show info. Rapid light missile launched variant 2, Tech 2. Go to them. Click on this picture, and you get this nice picture of them once it pops out. And there you go. You can kind of work it out from there. Anyway, talking up before I get killed. This is hostile space at the minute. Back to the slides then. So with some, knowledge and a bit of narrowing it down, you can work out, that these are probably autocannons because they have the spinny bit on them, or they're artillery because they're really long and pointy, things like that. Other than that, then you've got these lovely graphs in Python. This is a program that can help you to understand damage application and different things. And part of it are these graphs. You can change the velocity of you and your target, and then you can see at what range you apply different amounts of DPS and things like this. So this is an executioner versus a thrasher. The thrasher is probably fit with artillery weapons or something, because I was trying to prove, something. I can't remember, but there you go. Play with that at your leisure. And then after the battles, we have various ways of thinking about why damage applied in certain ways. So there's the logs and messages feature you should turn on in your game. When you open logs and messages, it's in the Neocom, you go down, you find it, logs and messages. Once you've got that, it all stays open for you, and you can see what was hitting you and with what weapon type, what type of offensive things. There's all of these different settings for it, the types of messages you can show, and you can also perhaps look at kill mails from opponents, kill mails from the things that you kill, and you can work out what was shooting what. So it'll show you the weapon types. Often, sometimes it doesn't, because it's mixed with drones and other things. But you can try and work out, or your opponent, if they lost the ship 10 minutes ago to somebody else, you could maybe look at the fitting and see it from there. And that is generally it. We will move on to other topics in other classes, right? So that was coming up to an hour long. So I think that's enough as an introduction to the topic. There's other things we're going to cover in other classes. Feel free to ask anything around other topics, but for now, just thinking about this particular one, is there anything anyone wants to ask? I'm just going to check the class questions thing as well. I'll put the old, sign to show that I did class. Okay. I can't hear anyone, so either you're all really shy or there's a problem with the audio. Just shot his type in. Thanks for the clap. How do you evaluate drones and such? Yeah, so a bit like small, medium, and large, same sort of thing. Small drones travel faster, apply better, and mediums travel slower, do a bit more DPS. That's the same is true then of the different race of drone. So what you'll find is like this, it's always the same. Minmatar drones are faster and they do a bit less DPS. So they'll track better because they can keep up with you, but they'll do a little bit less damage. And I think it might be the Galente drones that are on the other end of that scale, and they do the most DPS, but they're the slowest, I think. But there's like a bit of a range in between the two. Most drones are DPS drones, but you will also get things like ECM, web drones, maybe rarely, tracking disruption drones, things like that. Smart bombs would be a great counter to drones, or if you're in a fast ship, just running away. So will heavy drones on Ishtar perform as medium or light in application? No, but when they do hit, they hit hard. So if you look at the, it's all to do with the bonuses, right, of the actual Ishtar itself. If you look at the bonus for the Ishtar, so the Galente, Tech 2 Cruiser, heavy assault cruiser, so they can fit the damage control. Let's see. So 10% bonus to light, medium, or heavy hit points and damage. So that's their damage there. So you're looking at a 50% bonus to damage. So if they've got heavy drones out and they catch you with one hit, it's going to be a really hard hit. You know, if they do it in PvP, they're more likely to go for light drones unless you're slow moving, right? If you're standing and fighting, they'll keep the heavy drones out. That happens in Poshvin all the time. I mean, the individual pilot's application skills around drones is also important, right? Because there's all these little micro skills around, how fast do drones move and what's the lock-in range and different things. Any other questions? I did hear somebody talk very quickly, so the audio must be okay. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.